It's been a while since the last story video, so thanks for coming to my video. I really appreciate it. I have a bunch of stories to read today, and while I do that, I found a bunker in this location. It's very dark here, and let's keep searching and judge some people. All right. This next story honestly feels less like a family drama and more like the beginning of a true crime documentary. The deeper I got into it, the more confused I became, and by the end, I genuinely had no idea what was real anymore. My brother-in-law is in his late 30s, and for as long as I've known him, he's claimed to be dating the same woman. We'll call him Jim, and we'll call her Brady. According to him, they've been together for 10 years. They originally met when Jim was working as a student teacher. The weird part is, he was already an adult, and Brady was still in high school. Even back then, that sounded a little questionable. Over the years, Jim has talked about Brady constantly. He knows everything about her life, tells stories about her niece and nephew, shows us pictures of the kids, talks about where Brady works, what health issues she's dealing with, even says he's planning to move closer to her because she lives about an hour and a half away. Hearing him talk, you'd think they were the perfect long-term couple. Except, there's one tiny problem. In all the years I've been with my husband, I've never actually met Brady, not once. Jim never brought her to family holidays, birthdays, reunions, our wedding. Nothing. Every single time there was some excuse. She was busy, she wasn't feeling well, she had work. Something always came up. Even though she supposedly dated him for an entire decade, nobody in the family ever really saw her. Somehow, though, my mother-in-law insisted she'd heard him talking to Brady on the phone before. She'd seen pictures of her. She even claimed Brady was on Jim's phone plan. Everything sounded believable enough that nobody questioned it too much. There was one strange moment a few years ago, though. We were all at a pumpkin patch when we spotted Brady's sister along with her kids, the same niece and nephew Jim talked about all the time. You'd expect him to go over and say hello, right? Instead, he immediately turned around and walked the other direction as fast as possible. We all thought that was incredibly weird, but nobody pushed him on it. Looking back now, maybe we should have. Then things got even stranger. Last October, my husband found a picture on Facebook showing Brady kissing another guy at a Halloween party. Since Jim doesn't have social media, my husband sent him the photo. Jim thanked him, looked heartbroken for months, and we all assumed the relationship had finally ended. Then, out of nowhere, about 5 months later, Jim just started talking about Brady again, like absolutely nothing had happened. At work, he was telling everyone they'd been together for 10 years. It was as if the whole Halloween incident had never existed. Around that same time, my husband and I discovered something completely random. Brady is actually our third cousin on my dad's side of the family. I wish I was joking. A few weeks later, I decided to finally introduce myself to her. I found her Instagram, followed her, and sent her a friendly message inviting her to my son's birthday party. I basically said, "Hey, I've heard so much about you over the years. I'd love to finally meet you." Almost immediately, I noticed something odd. Her Instagram was full of photos, but there wasn't a single picture of Jim anywhere. Not one. She replied to my message politely, and then completely flipped the entire story upside down. She said she hadn't spoken to Jim in 10 years. I literally stared at my phone trying to process what I'd just read. Before I even had time to think, Jim somehow found out I'd messaged her and immediately texted me, telling me not to contact Brady anymore. He thanked me for thinking about her, but claimed they were simply working through some things. That didn't make any sense, so I replied to Brady and basically said, "I'm so sorry. I honestly thought you two were together because he talks about you all the time." Seconds later, another message from Jim. This time, telling me to block her. Meanwhile, Brady simply asked me, "What exactly does he say about me?" So I told her the truth. I mentioned all the stories about her niece and nephew, her health problems, even the cute nicknames Jim supposedly called her. She read my message and never replied again. The next day, Jim actually came to my office at work. He looked incredibly nervous. He couldn't maintain eye contact, stumbled over his words, and kept giving explanations that didn't really explain anything. He claimed Brady had been overwhelmed by my kind message. Then he said her mother had called him because Brady was apparently so emotional, she needed comforting. The weirdest part? Later he told my husband an entirely different version of the story. Suddenly it wasn't about Brady's mom anymore. Now she was simply overwhelmed that I'd reached out. Still, none of that explained why Brady herself had clearly told me they hadn't spoken in 10 years. Since then, Jim has become noticeably distant from the entire family. But every now and then, he'll randomly mention some tiny detail about Brady's life, like something her dog supposedly did that week, almost as if they're still talking every day. At this point, I couldn't let it go anymore. So I reached out to one of Brady's cousins, who also happens to know one of my friends. She was completely shocked when I explained everything. According to her, Brady has dated several different men over the last 10 years and has brought multiple boyfriends to family events. She said Brady hasn't mentioned Jim since they briefly dated back when she was underage and he was student teaching at her school. That's it. Nothing after that. So now I'm sitting here wondering, what is actually going on? Has my brother-in-law spent the last decade pretending to date someone who hasn't spoken to him in years? Is he lying to everyone? Is he lying to himself? Somehow my husband wants absolutely nothing to do with this, because the possibility that his own brother might genuinely need psychiatric help is too painful for him to even think about. Honestly, I don't blame him. But at this point, I feel like I've accidentally wandered into an episode of Dateline, and now I need to know how it ends. Personally, I think the scariest part of this story isn't the lying. It's how detailed the lies became. Remembering family members' names, pets, health problems, and daily life for years takes an incredible amount of commitment. If I were in her position, I'd stop investigating on my own and let his immediate family decide whether he needs help. Because if this really is a delusion, it's far beyond ordinary family drama. But what do you think? Was Jim secretly living inside a fantasy for 10 years? Or is there another explanation that somehow makes all of this make sense? You know, as a parent, there are probably a million things you worry about. You hope your kids stay healthy, find good people to love, build happy families of their own. But I don't think anyone ever prepares themselves for the possibility that one child could completely destroy the other's life. I'm the mother of 2 daughters. My oldest daughter, Emma, has been married for 11 years and has 2 wonderful kids. My younger daughter, Chloe, has been married for 8 years and has a 5-year-old son. For as long as I can remember, they were incredibly close. They grew up together, celebrated every holiday together, and I truly believed nothing could ever come between them. Then, about 6 weeks ago, my phone rang just after midnight. It was Emma, and she was completely hysterical. For months, she'd had this horrible feeling that something wasn't right with her husband. He'd become distant, constantly guarded his phone, and always seemed to have another excuse for staying late at work. That night, after he fell asleep beside her, she finally gave in to her suspicions and looked through his phone for the first time. What she found shattered her world. Hidden inside were years of explicit messages between her husband and her own sister. The affair hadn't lasted a few weeks or a few months. It had been going on for almost 4 years. I could barely understand Emma through her tears as she kept asking me the same question over and over again. How could my own sister do this to me? A few days later, our entire family gathered for my brother's birthday. Everything looked normal until Emma asked Chloe to step outside. At first, Chloe denied everything. She insisted Emma had misunderstood and was jumping to conclusions. But the moment Emma told her She'd read every single message herself. Chloe completely fell apart. She burst into tears and admitted everything. She kept repeating that she didn't know why she'd done it, that it was the biggest mistake of her life. Emma looked straight at her and asked, "How exactly is 4 years a mistake?" Chloe had absolutely no answer. The argument escalated within seconds. They were both screaming at each other, and before anyone could react, Chloe actually tried to slap Emma. Thankfully, several relatives jumped in and stopped her before she could. Meanwhile, Chloe's husband quietly realized what was happening, picked up their little boy, and went home. Within just a few days, both marriages completely fell apart. Emma filed for divorce, and after hearing the truth, Chloe's husband decided he wanted one too. Once everything became public, Chloe started calling me non-stop. One day alone, she called me 82 times. Eventually, I answered because I honestly hoped she'd explain something, anything, that would somehow make this nightmare make sense. Instead, she spent the entire call crying. She begged me not to abandon her. She said she'd already lost her husband, was probably going to lose shared custody of her son, and couldn't bear the thought of losing her mother, too. She admitted she didn't deserve forgiveness, but pleaded with me not to hate her forever. I listened carefully before telling her exactly how I felt. I told her I loved her, because she's my daughter, but I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. This wasn't one terrible decision made in a moment of weakness. This was 4 straight years of lying to her own sister, lying to her husband, and lying to every single person in our family. I told her I needed distance, and that I didn't want any contact with her for the foreseeable future. Since that conversation, I haven't answered another one of her calls. That's when the rest of my family started saying I was making a mistake. My sisters reminded me that Chloe had already lost almost everything. Her marriage was over, her relationship with Emma was destroyed, many of her friends had cut her off. The future she'd imagined for herself and her son had completely fallen apart. They told me she'd started therapy, that she genuinely regretted what she'd done, and that she wasn't making excuses anymore. Then they asked me one question that I still can't answer. If a mother won't stand by her child after they've hit rock bottom, who will? They also reminded me that by cutting Chloe out of my life, I was also losing precious time with my grandson, even though he'd done absolutely nothing wrong. And they're right. None of this is his fault. But every single time I even think about letting Chloe back into my life, I picture Emma sitting alone in the middle of the night, staring at that phone, realizing that the 2 people she trusted most had been betraying her for years, without a single ounce of guilt. That image just won't leave my head. I honestly don't know if I'll ever be able to move past it. Personally, I don't think this is about refusing to forgive forever. I think it's about accepting that some betrayals leave wounds that don't disappear just because someone finally feels sorry. If I were in her position, I'd probably still love my daughter, but rebuilding that relationship would take years, not weeks, and it certainly wouldn't start by pretending those 4 years never happened. What do you think? If one of your children destroyed the life of another, could you ever truly treat them the same again? I really thought this was going to be one of those wholesome stories where an old group of college friends gets back together, shares a few embarrassing memories, laughs about the past, and everyone goes home happy. Instead, it turned into something I never could have imagined. My wife Kara and I have been married for 4 years. It was an arranged marriage, but despite that, we've built an amazing relationship. I genuinely love her more than anything, and I'd do absolutely anything for her without hesitation. Before we got married, we made one agreement that worked really well for both of us. We would each have our own personal space, and neither of us had to share every detail of our past unless we truly felt the other person needed to know. Honestly, I never had much to hide. Kara, though, was different. From the very beginning, she told me she wasn't proud of the person she used to be. She described her college years almost like she was talking about someone else entirely. Every time she'd mention that period of her life, she'd refer to her younger self almost in the third person, calling that version of herself a terrible human being. According to her, she'd completely changed after finding religion. The woman I married was incredibly modest, deeply religious, and spent most of her free time praying or helping people through her faith. I'd seen old photos and videos of her from college, but honestly, they looked like two completely different people. Kara never really had many friends anymore. I was the person she shared everything with. Then, completely out of nowhere, she got a phone call from her best friend from college, Renee. The moment Kara heard her voice, she absolutely lit up. I hadn't seen her smile like that in a long time. Renee invited her to a reunion party with all of their old college friends. At first, Kara didn't want to go. She seemed nervous, almost scared. I kept encouraging her, telling her the worst thing that could happen was having a boring evening catching up with old friends. Eventually, she agreed, but only if I came with her. Honestly, I thought it'd be fun. I figured I'd finally hear some funny, embarrassing stories about my wife from her college days. The second we arrived, I realized something was very, very wrong. Kara showed up dressed exactly the way she always dresses now. Conservative clothes, almost no makeup, barely any jewelry. Meanwhile, every one of her old friends looked like they were heading to the biggest nightclub in town. At first, the evening seemed harmless enough. Everyone laughed about old memories and silly college stories. Then, the conversation slowly changed. The stories became more explicit, then darker, and eventually downright disturbing. I learned that Kara and Renee had basically been the leaders of a group of mean girls back in college. They partied constantly, abused alcohol and drugs, slept with countless people, and, according to their own friends, deliberately ruined other people's lives for entertainment. At one point, Kara excused herself to use the bathroom. The second she walked away, the rest of the group immediately turned toward me. It was almost like they'd been waiting for her to leave. They started telling me story after story about my wife. Some things I already knew. Kara had admitted she'd had relationships with professors during college, but I had no idea the number was supposedly that high. Then Renee proudly told me something that honestly made my stomach turn. She claimed that she and Kara had deliberately manipulated another woman into believing she was a lesbian, just to destroy her marriage, simply because that woman's husband had rejected Kara's advances. The worst part wasn't even the story itself. It was the fact everyone around the room laughed like it was one of the funniest memories they'd ever shared. I didn't even know what to think anymore. I just wanted to leave. I started looking for Kara, but she was nowhere to be found. Eventually, I checked the bathroom and found her sitting on the floor in the corner, curled into a ball, crying so hard she could barely breathe. I didn't ask any questions. I helped her up, took her straight to the car, and we drove home in complete silence, except for one thing. The entire drive, she just kept repeating the same words over and over again. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She cried for days afterward. Then, something changed. Instead of talking about what happened, she completely buried herself in religion. What used to be 2 hours of prayer every day suddenly became 6, sometimes even 8 hours. I figured she just needed time, so I gave her space and waited for her to come to me whenever she was ready. She barely spoke after that. Every night, she'd still cuddle up next to me in bed, but we'd lie there in silence. Then one evening, she finally spoke. She told me she'd decided to remain celibate for the rest of her life, as punishment for the sins she'd committed in college. She apologized for making the decision without me and told me that if I couldn't accept living like that, I should leave her. I begged her to at least consider therapy. She refused completely. I couldn't stop thinking that I'd ruined our nearly perfect marriage, simply because I'd convinced her to attend one stupid party. One night, I finally couldn't stay silent anymore. As we got into bed, I held her and quietly told her I love you, and I'll wait until you're ready for me. Honestly, I wasn't even sure exactly what I meant. I just knew I had to say something. The moment those words left my mouth, tears filled her eyes. She looked like she wanted to completely break down but was desperately trying to hold herself together. She wrapped her arms around me as tightly as she could and whispered, "I love you." We spent the entire night just holding each other. The next morning, I gently asked her one more time if she'd at least talk to a therapist. I promised I'd support her no matter what happened. This time, she actually agreed. She kissed me before leaving the room. It was our first kiss in almost 2 months, and for a brief moment, I honestly believed I had my wife back. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kara, sent from our own kitchen. It said, "My celibacy doesn't have to mean yours. You're free to leave me. If you stay, I won't interfere with your physical needs." Reading those words absolutely broke me. We didn't speak for the rest of the day. Eventually, thanks to several members of her religious community, Kara finally started therapy. Everyone keeps telling me she'll recover with enough time. I truly hope they're right. But now, I don't even know what recovery looks like anymore. Even if therapy helps her heal, I don't know whether the woman who comes back will still be the wife I married. And after hearing some of the stories about her past that night, part of me doesn't even know if our marriage can ever return to what it was before. For now, all I can do is stand beside her and help her through whatever she's fighting. After that, I honestly have no idea what our future looks like. Personally, I don't think the party destroyed this marriage. I think the party forced both of them to confront wounds that had been buried for years. Real change doesn't erase the past, and guilt doesn't disappear just because someone has become a better person. If I were in his place, I'd keep supporting her through therapy, but I'd also accept that healing doesn't always mean things go back to the way they were. Sometimes both people survive, but the relationship doesn't. What do you think? If you discovered a side of the person you love that completely changed the way you saw them, would you be able to rebuild that trust? Or would some truths be impossible to live with? Sometimes you start reading a story thinking it's going to be about an overprotective parent or some weird family misunderstanding. And then, with every paragraph, it gets darker and darker until you realize you're reading about something far more disturbing. My stepdad has been in my life since I was 8 years old. We never had the perfect relationship, but I always tried to believe he meant well. Sure, we'd butt heads sometimes, and over the years, he'd made a few comments that felt off. I brushed them aside because, in my mind, he was still my dad. I never wanted to believe he could intentionally do something to hurt me. A little while ago, my mom, my stepdad, and my 2 younger brothers went away on a camping trip. I couldn't go because I had to work, so I stayed home to watch the house and take care of the animals. Right before they left, my stepdad installed several new security cameras around the property. One of them was positioned outside my bedroom window, supposedly to monitor the backyard. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Security cameras around the house seemed perfectly reasonable. The next day, my boyfriend came over to keep me company while I was home alone. That's when he noticed something I never would have caught myself. The camera outside my window wasn't connected like a normal security camera. Instead, the cable ran directly into my bedroom and was plugged into what looked like an ordinary phone charging block. Except, it wasn't a charger at all. It was one of those hidden spy camera power adapters. The moment I realized what I was looking at, my stomach completely dropped. The camera wasn't aimed at the backyard. It was pointed directly through my room toward my bedroom door, giving it a full view of almost my entire bedroom, including the place where I changed clothes every single day. I desperately tried to convince myself there had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe he'd grabbed the wrong power adapter by accident. Maybe he really was only trying to watch for intruders. But no matter how many excuses I came up with, none of them explained why there was a surveillance camera recording inside my bedroom. Then I noticed something even worse. There was an SD card installed in the camera. At that point, I realized this wasn't just live surveillance. It could have been recording everything. What made the whole situation even more disturbing was remembering something my stepdad had said before leaving. He actually encouraged me to invite my boyfriend over while they were gone. That made absolutely no sense because he'd always been extremely strict about us never being alone together in the house. Suddenly, that invitation didn't feel kind anymore. It felt calculated. My boyfriend and I immediately decided we needed to find out exactly what had been recorded. But before doing anything else, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I reached out to my aunt and uncle, who lived nearby. They believed me immediately and promised they'd help me tell my mom when she came home. My head was spinning. My mom has a 5-year-old son with my stepdad. If what I was thinking was true, exposing him could completely destroy our family. But at the same time, how could I stay silent? Eventually, I realized this was far too serious to handle privately. That night, I went straight to the police station, filed a report, and handed over the hidden camera along with the SD card. The officer told me this wasn't a misunderstanding or some harmless mistake. He said it was an extremely serious offense and that investigators would likely contact me within a few days. Hearing that made everything feel terrifyingly real. My original plan was to tell my mom as soon as she got back from camping, but I wanted to do it somewhere safe, far away from my stepdad. My aunt agreed to be there with us. I planned to explain everything: the hidden camera, the way it had been positioned, the uncomfortable comments he'd made over the years that I'd ignored, and all the evidence I'd gathered. I even arranged for my boyfriend to pick up my younger brothers afterward if necessary, so they wouldn't have to witness whatever happened next. I kept hoping my mom would understand why I'd gone to the police first, instead of calling her while she was still alone with him hundreds of miles away. Before that conversation ever happened, everything fell apart. Somehow my stepdad found out first. By the time I finally spoke to my mom, he'd already convinced her of his version of events. Instead of believing me, she believed him. I couldn't even process what was happening. My entire world had collapsed almost overnight. And the one person I thought would protect me had chosen to stand beside the man who'd secretly put a camera in my bedroom. I moved out immediately and stayed with relatives while trying to recover emotionally. The police investigation moved painfully slowly. And because everything became so public online, I had to stop sharing details while the case was still active. The next year was one of the hardest periods of my life, but somehow I kept moving forward. My boyfriend and I moved in together. I graduated from nursing school. I started my first nursing job. Through everything that happened, he never left my side. My aunt and uncle became my biggest support system and helped me survive what felt impossible at the time. Unfortunately, justice never really came. Between the investigation, outside circumstances, and pressure from my own family, nothing happened to my stepdad. My mom stayed with him. Contact with my younger brothers became extremely limited because of everything that had happened. Watching my own family slowly drift away from me hurt almost as much as discovering the camera itself. Looking back now, I understand just how much I was manipulated. The hidden camera had actually streamed directly to my stepdad's phone. It had recorded intimate moments between me and my boyfriend. I wanted to continue with the police case, but my mom pressured me to stop. She even held my college fund over my head, making me feel like pursuing justice would destroy my own future. I was scared, overwhelmed, and completely alone. Today, I regret giving into that pressure more than anything. My family still accepts him. Most of them act like nothing serious ever happened. I'm completely no contact with my stepdad and only have very limited contact with my mom. She's become deeply religious now and tells people she prays that I'll eventually heal and come back to the family. But healing doesn't mean pretending something never happened. These days, my life is finally moving forward. My boyfriend is now my fiancé. We're planning our future together, and we're getting ready to move across the country to leave all of this behind. My mother still has no idea she won't be invited to our wedding. If I could go back in time, I would have followed through with the police report, no matter what anyone threatened me with. I was young, scared, and trusted the wrong people. I'm not that person anymore. I've learned to protect my peace, trust my instincts, and walk away from people who refuse to protect me, even if they're family. Personally, I don't think the hidden camera was the deepest betrayal in this story. The deepest betrayal was realizing that the people who should have protected her chose to protect the person who violated her instead. If I were in her position today, I'd make the same choice she's making now. Build a new life, surrounded by people who actually make me feel safe. Because sometimes, the healthiest family isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you choose. What do you think? If your own family refused to believe you after something like this, would you ever be able to forgive them? Or would you walk away forever?